Hello everyone, this is Michael Hagedorn. I have a demonstration for you today which is a little bit outside of the usual. I won't be styling a tree. We're going to be working on a Japanese maple in its refinement stage. So it was assembled as sort of a clump 12 to 15 years ago, and I'm going to repot the tree, and then we're going to wait a few months and then get back to it to do some of the shoot and foliage operations that can help us balance the tree and to create some of the refinement that this species is capable of. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of this. Cheers. So this Japanese maple was created by a bunch of cuttings. I threw them into a small pot and for a few years forgot about them. And before I could pull them out, they had started to fuse together. So I decided to leave them that way and create a clump. And this tree has a few problems. We're now in, I don't know, it's almost 15 years old at this point. The major tree is not much bigger than a couple of these others, so we have to think about how we're going to make this the major tree. By which I mean the girth of the tree. So in the pruning that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be knocking back these secondary and tertiary trees and not pruning that one at all, in order to increase the girth of the tree, a little bit the height as well. One of the problems with forest plantings and also clumps is that the main tree, if it's too short, we have branches that start at the top and almost nothing down here, whereas these smaller trees have lots of branches off to the side, and so they're going to increase in girth down here, and this one is going to remain skinny. So it's a problem that builds over time unless we make our main tree considerably taller than the others. Okay. Thank you. This is very rough pruning. Still a young tree, so I'm leaving a lot that will not be part of the final design. I'm not worrying about that too much right now. Leaving a few multiples. Mostly, if you've been noticing, I'm cutting off mostly the thicker ones in preference for the thinner. If it's really skinny, we can leave the whole thing. Like this here is kind of weak, so we just leave the whole thing. In a year or two, that'll thicken and this will start to get a little weaker. It's still very apically dominant. If you make cuts like this, you get a lot of budding through here, especially right now, just as the buds are pushing. This is about as late as you want to repot a Japanese maple. see that significant height difference. We're still going to need a few more years to grow that one out. I'll do a little bit more careful work in a bit with some scissors. Okay, now we'll do a little bit of scissor work. There's a threesome there. Now, if we cut an awful lot off, we could leave 3 for a little while. As long as we take it off the next year, it'll slow down everything else. We're gonna get, given the amount that I'm cutting here, we're gonna get a bunch of buds popping in here. Really long internode, cut something like that off. This even has some flowers on it. Just showing, here's the flower. Right there. We don't really want the flower, so we'll take that off once it opens a little bit.
Got it.
Notice the color on this one. It's quite a bit more red than these. That indicates weakness. Take a look at the buds, they're tiny. This is gonna die. It's still alive, but it's on its way out. We're gonna take it off. No dog barking either.
You're good? Rolling. Mm-hmm.
So extracting the maple from the pot, we have a little bit of an inner lip here, so I'll probably need a hook or a scythe to take that out. The maple has been in here for 2 or 3 years, so it's starting to get a little compacted, and we want to repot it to keep the momentum of the tree going. And once we get it out, we'll take some of this moss away, and we'll investigate what the nabari looks like, and we'll trim away some of the roots and soil and underneath, and then we'll put it back. Okay, I'm gonna move this over. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
This is not a very old pot, so I'm not too worried about the edge of it, scraping across it. It doesn't have any patina on it. I'm gonna go with a pot that has a little bit of an inner lip. You want the tool to go all the way to the bottom. You wanna feel the bottom of the pot. That way it'll lift out quite easily. Even with a bag pot, which has a real curl to it, and there's a lot of soil in the side of the pot there. And if you use this tool, you can cut that out, and then this roll of soil comes away once you get it out. Okay. When you have a tree with low branches, you want to have your tool with your knuckles out so that you're not hitting the branches. So this is the proper orientation if we had a tree with branches that were much lower than this one. So I think I've released the maple well enough with the scythe. The wires underneath are cut, and I'm going to take one glove off to grab the trunk, otherwise we can get this pretty dirty. I've done this before, and with a dirty hand, and the dirt stays on there or oils on your hand, they can stay on there for about a year. So it's a bit of a mess.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So now that we have our maple out of the pot, I'm going to investigate how our fusing of the nabari in between the trunks is going. I have some toothbrushes and a fork tweezer and whatnot for that. These pretty gloves that I'm wearing are not a fashion statement. The soils that I use, this is pumice and akadama, that is very abrasive, and it will make sandpaper out of your hands unless through a long repotting season you don't wear some gloves. So I'm working radially. I don't want to go like this. You can also use a chopstick. It has to be very gentle on the root. Good. There we're getting some fusing. A bit. I think yellow's my color. What do you think? Crossing pretty good. Let's see if we can get that out. There. Some roots that cross are okay because they fuse. So we don't have to make this completely radial. It's a little bit of a myth with maples. The large roots, it's good to arrange that way, but the small ones can fuse, so it's not entirely inaccurate. But there's several ways of creating fusing. You can lay this out on some of you might have seen a board that you lay out the roots and you arrange them all. That's a great way to begin, especially with an old tree. But with a young tree, like this one, you want these tiny little fine roots, and you encourage them. You put the fertilizer there, put moss on top. Your fine roots are your fusible roots, and that's what's causing all of this fusing here, all throughout this area. These are the fine fusible roots, not big roots. This trunk and this trunk are grafts. They were cuttings that I made from this tree. So they had a shoot and they had a root, and I tucked them in there, pinned them on, made a little groove, pinned them on, and this is probably about 6 years in. And we're seeing some pretty good fusing through this area. Not a lot between these trunks though yet. So there's still more to do. It's still a young tree. It's only about 15 years old. I have another tree which we'll be showing, which is closer to 50 years. And it has a little bit of a different fusing pattern. So we have our tree prepared back in the pot, and this is a great time to step back from the tree and take a good look at what you got, because you're going to live with it for a while. And it's also an opportunity to improve our tree into the next phase of its life. We've been talking about this main trunk, how we want to make it larger and thicker. Another thing that we want to look at is its kind of dominance in the group. And right now the dominance is a little bit split between these two in terms of inclination. If this is a main tree, it should be one of the more upright trees, and it's leaning a bit to the side. So I think what we'll do is put a little bit more soil under this half of the pot. And hopefully that'll bring it back. It'll be fairly subtle, but we might move it there over a period of time and take more soil off there over a little while. Once Nabaris get really established, it can be really hard to do this. So while the tree is within its first 15 years or so, we do want to do some of that. So I'm just going to put a layer or two of soil down here, hopefully, because this is a tall tree, we actually don't need an awful lot to bring that up. Okay, ready?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to do just a little bit more. As I said, this is a process that'll take a little while. We'll bring this down over time. We don't want the Nabari to be too adventuresome, but it also allows us to put this part of the group a little bit higher, the Nabari part, and this a little bit lower, which lends a sense also of dominance. So Nabari also is part of that story. Adding just a little bit more, and I'm going to correct my placement because it was much too far to the right. Finally, I'm going to look down the axis of the plant to be sure that it's right in the middle. In the front, we want it to be one side or another according to the flow, and I want the tip a little bit to the front, which it isn't quite yet. Somewhere around there. So I'm going over this piece of bamboo here, which is driven into the root ball. You can only do this when the root ball is really quite firm with roots. Once you get it started with your hands, like I had just done there, take it off so that you don't break off any shoot like that, or bark if you have a flaky kind of bark, and then you can begin to twist. If you have low branches, it can help to keep your pliers low. You push down on this and you kind of spin it like this. If you have the room, you can come from on top, but sometimes you break branches off. So sometimes this is a handy trick. And then when you release the bamboo, the whole thing tightens up. With a big flat Nabari in a shallow pot, it doesn't take an awful lot to lock this in completely. We can hide it a little bit. Okay. Keep your hand on the side of the pot, you don't lose a lot of soil. Use different angles. There's not a lot of root hanging out, but there's still some spaces underneath this, so it won't take an awful long time to do this. Just a little bit.
a long time, but he enjoyed it. So, motto, yeah. I think I pronounced it correct.
I gotta get my custom chopstick business going here.
I like your chopsticks.
Thank you.
Little thicker than.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this one.
That's good.
It's very good for this kind of just pushing up to the.
Yeah, I was going to use those, the giveaway chopsticks from the restaurant.
Yeah.
It's too narrow. It
Yeah,
doesn't break so
narrow.
easy. Yeah, you should do the bamboo business.
So we're back. This is several months later. We repotted this Japanese maple in March, and it has grown out and mostly hardened off. I think there's a few leaves here that aren't quite hardened off yet, but this is a good time to cut back the shoots that have grown out and also to look at some of the leaf options that we have for some partial defoliation. This is, unless it's very young, this is a plant that does not really like full defoliation. Some of the Japanese maples, when they're a little older, can kind of be very grumpy. If we take all the leaves off, the tree may or may not grow out that year. It's very different than a trident maple, which will flush with predictability. But for now, we're going to cut these back, and we might not get a response. That's one of the curiosities of working with Japanese maple. Even though these are fairly strong shoots, usually when you cut something like that back strong on a multiple flush plant, you're going to get a big response. On Japanese maple, it might just sit there. But we still want to do this work if we want to keep the twiggage kind of thin. So this is mid-season work, and it helps keep our winter display, our silhouette tree in good trim, meaning delicate tracery of twigs. If we leave these on till the fall, which we might want to do if we have a weak tree, then we'll have strengthened the plant, but we might thicken the twig quite a bit. So for refinement work, for show work, we want to trim these back a little sooner rather than later. So I'll cut a few of these. We're cutting usually to the first set of leaves right here. That's very strong, so in the fall, I might want to cut this part off and leave this little twig here. That's a second consideration. This is really strong, and yet it's also at the top of one of our smaller trunks, so I think for this year, I think we will cut it back to here. See how the plant responds to that. I don't know if you guys can see that, but here's a little shoot stub that was cut last year. Really weak ones you can leave till the fall. It's mostly the big stuff that we want to stop from getting too big for a plant like this, because we're going for a little bit more refinement now. This tree is probably about 12 years old, something like that. So for this area here, that's about all we want to do. And this is what we've taken off so far. We'll talk about leaf defoliation next.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So here's a pretty thick shoot. We're going to cut it at the first pair of leaves. There's another one, and another. Some of these very skinny ones, here's a good example of a skinny one. That can be left on so that you'd strengthen this branch. You'd weaken this branch and you strengthen this branch. So here we are again. We have a small, moderately strong shoot and several pairs of leaves, and we have a decision to make. Let's just assume that this is an area in the outer part of the tree, and we're trying to get some light on the inside. If we have that situation, if the tree is starting to get a little dense, what we can do is cut one of the pair of leaves off. There. Cut the petiole right there. That'll fall off in a week or so. And if you do this everywhere, you're going to make a much thinner area. Here's our result. 50%. So
I prefer this method because it looks nice, but there's a different technique that some people prefer because it can help even up the buds a little bit, and that is cutting off all the ends of the leaves like that. It's kind of like cutting off your fingers and leaving the palm or something like that. There's another way to do it. So if you prefer that, that works as well. This will let light on the inside and keep the very small shoots here. Like here's a good example. There's a tiny little shoot right here. Small leaves, short little internode there. Without encouragement, in a year or two that might die. So by trimming back this part here, this is attached to that shoot. I know we probably just lost it. Here it is, right there. By trimming back this shoot, maybe cutting one leaf off, we've given this a lot of encouragement. That'll strengthen up a little bit, especially if you do that over a few years. Again, you're probably not going to see a response on this tree. It's not going to flush with new growth. So those are a few ideas of how to help our bonsai Japanese maple get balance. So we're going to strengthen some areas and we're going to weaken others using shoot reduction and leaf control, or sugar loss, really. When we cut off a leaf, that means that we're reducing some sugar production in one area, and that's going to give an advantage in another area. For Japanese maple display, fall and winter both times that the maple may be featured, and we feature different parts of the plant at those different times. In the fall, we can feature the leaves if they haven't fallen yet. There's some incredible color on them. I keep looking over this tree. This is actually a red maple, Acer rubrum, which is native to the eastern northern parts of North America. This is a variety, Benikawa, of Japanese maple, which has kind of a reddish bark, which is another thing we can feature. So you can play around with pots with your display ideas. This pot, though it's unglazed, was chosen to kind of show off this reddish bark by making a pot that's a little more subdued. With this one, the red maple turns a bright orange in the fall, even a bit of a red, and so the blue is maybe a bit of a complement to that. In terms of what we might display with the bonsai, you can think about scrolls or objects or plants. These are understory plants of middle mountain forests, so we can think about some of the plants that grow in regions like that, like wild ginger, which has a large leaf. It's a very different shaped leaf than this. We can think about animals like deer, birds like ruffed grouse. We're tested to be naturalists when we begin thinking about display. Yeah. In terms of plants, if you want to accent your Japanese maple with a plant, a woodland plant that maybe has a berry on it, like wintergreen or something like that might be good. A grass probably wouldn't be quite right because we don't see a lot of the grasses that we're familiar with, at any rate, in the middle of the forest. That tends to be, prairie type stuff, which is not where this plant comes from. Well, I'm sorry that I wasn't with you in person. I think we all were disappointed that we couldn't get together, but glad to share with you Japanese maple, and I hope you enjoy the other demonstrations. Michael Hagedorn saying goodbye from North America. Japanese maple is one of the,
zoom back
Purple
in.
water bottle, pink straw.
That's just
If
my-
you want really,
I wonder what they display in the fall in Australia with the Japanese maple.
Oh,
Because
that's-
technically the fall is
yeah,
like
right.
May.
right, good.
And
good.
then what do they have? Flying foxes? Like I'm
Oh,